All right, I need you to pay very close attention right now, because what I am about to tell you is something that I genuinely believe is the most important story of this entire conflict, and I mean that seriously. I am not doing the thing where I say nobody is talking about this when actually everyone is. I mean that the specific sequence of events I am going to walk you through today has not been assembled in one place, in one coherent argument, by any major outlet that I have found. CNN is covering the strikes. BBC is covering the diplomacy. Al Jazeera is covering the Hormuz negotiations. But nobody is connecting the specific dots that I want to connect today, because when you connect them, the conclusion you arrive at is one that is genuinely uncomfortable for a lot of people in Washington, and uncomfortable conclusions tend to get avoided in mainstream coverage. Here is the argument I'm going to make. Trump drew a red line. Iran crossed it. And nothing happened. And I want to be very precise about what I mean by nothing, because the counter argument is going to be that something clearly happened. America launched a massive military campaign, so how can I say nothing happened? The answer is that in the logic of deterrence, the only thing that matters is whether the political objective was achieved. Not the number of bombs dropped, not the number of targets struck, not the dollar amount spent. The question is whether the red line held. And when you look at the specific evidence I'm going to walk you through, the answer to that question is no. The red line did not hold. And the reason that matters is not just for this conflict. It is for every conflict that comes after it, in every theater on the planet where American deterrence is currently doing the work of preventing a war from starting. So let me start at the beginning, because the specifics matter here, and I want to be very precise. On February 25th, 2026, Trump stood in front of Congress at the State of the Union address and drew the line explicitly. Stephen Miller, his senior advisor, said it publicly and on the record. The position of the United States was that Iran would not be permitted to enrich uranium on Iranian soil, full stop, and that America would use force if necessary to enforce that position. Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, said it even more bluntly. No enrichment. That is the red line. We will not accept a bad deal. This was not ambiguous. This was not hedged. This was a clearly stated American position communicated at the highest level to the entire world. Now, here is what happened after that red line was drawn. On February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a joint military campaign against Iran. CENTCOM has since stated that it struck over 11,000 targets in Iran since the beginning of the war. That number is documented on the Wikipedia page for the 2026 Iran war and has not been disputed by anyone. They hit Natanz, they hit Fordo, they hit Isfahan. The Times of Israel confirmed that all three of those nuclear sites sustained significant damage. Operation Midnight Hammer specifically targeted Iran's key nuclear infrastructure using B-2 stealth bombers and Tomahawk cruise missiles. CSIS published an analysis of that operation and described the damage as substantial. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed. The chief of the army staff was killed. The Air Force commander was killed. The head of the IRGC was killed. By any conventional measure, the military campaign was executed at an enormous scale, with genuine devastation inflicted on the target. And now I want you to ask yourself one question. If the red line was that Iran will not be permitted to enrich uranium, what happened to Iran's enriched uranium stockpile? Because this is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. Al Jazeera reported in May 2026 that Iran is believed to be holding approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. The Arms Control Center confirmed that number as of July 16, 2026. I want to put that in concrete terms for you. 90% purity is required for weapons-grade uranium. 60% is one technical step away. And according to the IAEA, Iran had enough of this material for approximately 12 nuclear weapons if further enriched. That material exists. right now, today. The New York Times reported in March 2026 that U.S. officials believe Iran can still access some of this uranium through a very narrow access point at one of the bombed sites. The Times of Israel reported that Iran has mined the entrances to its bombed Isfahan nuclear complex and deliberately collapsed tunnels to prevent the United States from retrieving the material. And CNN, citing 5 separate U.S. intelligence sources, reported that Iran's uranium stockpile is buried beneath rubble, surrounded by explosive mines, and inaccessible to any outside party. So here is the situation as it actually stands. The red line was no enrichment. The United States struck over 11,000 targets, and 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium still exists inside Iran, buried underground, surrounded by mines, and completely outside American control. That is not the red line holding. That is the red line being crossed, and the enriched material surviving the attempt to enforce it. But here is where I think the deterrence story gets even more important than the nuclear material itself, because deterrence is not just about physical outcomes. It is about what the other side believes you are willing to do. And on April 7th, 2026, something happened that I think is the single most consequential moment of this entire conflict for American credibility globally. Trump posted on Truth Social that, and I'm quoting him directly, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." Harvard Kennedy School's Carr Center published an analysis of that moment. The title was "The Day American Credibility Died." The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist published a detailed analysis arguing that this was functionally a nuclear threat because the scale of destruction being promised was physically impossible to achieve with conventional weapons. Multiple people interpreted it as nuclear signaling, including former senior American officials, retired generals, and multiple major news organizations. And the White House, when pressed to clarify that it was not a nuclear threat, declined to do so definitively. They said only that the president knows where things stand. Now, here is what happened after that threat. Iran did not capitulate. Iran accepted a ceasefire the following day, April 8th, and the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is very precise about this. The ceasefire saw Tehran give up nothing. Iran kept its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire was not a response to being intimidated. It was, in the bulletin's exact words, primarily a climb down by Washington. Trump had threatened that a civilization would die. Iran called the bluff. And then, when the June 17th Memorandum of Understanding was signed, the bulletin's conclusion was direct. The United States was the party forced to make concessions to end the war, buckling under the cumulative economic pressure of the Hormuz blockade. Iran conceded nothing from the pre-war status quo. And then came the moment that I think crystallizes the deterrence collapse most clearly. On June 17th, 2026, the same day the MOU was signed, Trump told Reuters that it would be unfair for Iran not to have ballistic missiles if other countries have them. Reuters confirmed it. Al Jazeera confirmed it. The Times of Israel confirmed it. Trump doubled down on it the following day. In February 2026, the American red line was 0 enrichment and 0 ballistic missiles. On June 17th, 2026, the day a deal was signed, Trump said it would be unfair to take away Iran's missiles. That is not a negotiating concession. That is a complete abandonment of the original stated position. And when you abandon a stated red line in public on the day you sign a deal, you are not just making a concession to Iran. You are broadcasting to every other actor in the world exactly how much your red lines are worth. Now, I want to present the strongest version of the argument that I am wrong, because I think you should always do this. The counter argument goes like this. Trump achieved things that nobody had achieved before. Khamenei is dead. The top military command is eliminated. Iran's nuclear infrastructure sustained unprecedented damage. The IRGC is degraded. Iran's economy is under enormous strain. And any country that launches a military campaign of this scale and kills the opposing head of state has demonstrated enormous power and willingness to use force. That is deterrence restored, not deterrence lost. I hear that argument. I take it seriously. Parts of it are genuinely true. But here is what that argument cannot explain. If the deterrence was restored, why does 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium still exist inside Iran? If the red line held, why did Trump say it is unfair to take away Iran's missiles? If Iran was genuinely broken, why did the Iraqi Prime Minister fly personally to Tehran with a ceasefire proposal on July 23rd? And why did Iran say no? The New York Times confirmed that rejection. The Institute for the Study of War noted that Iran's rejection of the Iraqi proposal suggests Tehran believes it has the strategic advantage. A country whose deterrence has been shattered does not reject peace proposals from its closest regional ally. A country that believes it is winning does. And this is where the story stops being about Iran and starts being about the rest of the world. Because deterrence is a system, and systems have network effects. When one node in the system fails, the signal propagates everywhere. The 38 North Institute, which focuses specifically on North Korea, published a detailed analysis in March 2026. Their conclusion was that North Korea is likely to interpret the Iran war as strengthening the justification for maintaining and expanding its nuclear arsenal. The Korea Economic Institute published a parallel analysis saying the Iran war may push North Korea to lower its nuclear threshold. The New York Times reported in April 2026 that North Korea is actively testing new weapons and drawing specific tactical lessons from the Iran conflict. And CSIS published a report asking directly whether the United States is prepared for a war with China, and their answer included the finding that American air defense stockpiles were depleted by potentially over 50% for some systems during the Iran war. The Foreign Policy Research Institute published a piece titled, "How War with Iran Undermines Deterrence in the Indo-Pacific," arguing that the conflict has created a window of reduced American conventional deterrence in the Pacific theater that China's military planners are actively studying. This is the downstream consequence that nobody in mainstream coverage is connecting to the Iran war directly. Every military planner in Beijing, Pyongyang, and Moscow watched what happened. They watched America strike 11,000 targets and spend over $100 billion. They watched Khamenei get killed. And then they watched 440 kilograms of enriched uranium survive underground. They watched Trump say it is unfair to take Iran's missiles. They watched the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists publish an article saying Trump's nuclear blackmail failed spectacularly. And they drew their own conclusions about what American red lines are worth the next time one gets drawn in their neighborhood. So let me give you 3 specific things to watch over the next 30 days that will tell you whether the deterrence damage I am describing is real and deepening. First, watch the August deadline for the final Iran nuclear agreement. The 60-day MOU window expires in mid-August. The core deadlock is still there. The United States wants zero enrichment. Iran says enrichment is a non-negotiable sovereign right. The New York Times reported in June that the U.S. has demanded Iran halt enrichment for at least 20 years. Iran's foreign minister said the American side has not actually asked for zero enrichment, which directly contradicts the public American position. When two sides cannot even agree on what the other side is demanding, a final agreement by August is not realistic. Watch what happens to the language when the deadline approaches. If you hear about an extension being granted quietly, that is a signal that Washington has privately accepted that the original red line is gone and is now managing the optics of that fact. Second, watch North Korea specifically. The 38 North Institute and the Korea Economic Institute have both flagged that Pyongyang is drawing lessons from this conflict in real time. North Korea already has nuclear weapons. The question is whether watching Iran's nuclear material survive American bombing makes Kim Jong-un more or less willing to negotiate away his own program. Every piece of analysis I have found says more willing to keep it, less willing to negotiate. If you see North Korea conduct a nuclear test or a major missile test in the next 60 days, that is the deterrence ripple effect becoming visible above the surface. Third, watch South Korea's domestic political conversation. Harvard's Gazette published a piece in April 2026 specifically about deterring the next nuclear arms race. Multiple analysts have noted that South Korea, which gave up its nuclear weapons program under American security guarantees, is watching very carefully. If American deterrence credibility is eroding, South Korea's calculus about relying on those guarantees changes. Any statement from a senior South Korean official about independent nuclear deterrence or reviewing nuclear options should be treated as a major signal, not a footnote. Here is your homework. Go read the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist piece titled, "Why Trump's Nuclear Blackmail of Iran Failed Spectacularly." It is free, it is public, and it walks through the specific mechanics of why nuclear coercion failed in this case and what the historical precedents are. Then go read the Harvard Kennedy School Carr Center piece titled "The Day American Credibility Died." Then go read the CSIS analysis titled "Is the United States Prepared for a War with China?" and look specifically at the numbers on air defense stockpile depletion. Do not take my word for any of this. Primary sources, raw analysis. Come back and tell me where I got it wrong. And let me leave you with the question I want you to actually sit with. Not rhetorically, genuinely. Trump said in February 2026 that Iran would never have nuclear weapons and never have ballistic missiles, and that America would use force to enforce those positions. 5 months later, 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium exists inside Iran, buried under rubble that Iran has mined to prevent anyone from touching it. And Trump said on June 17th that it would be unfair to take away Iran's missiles. The red line was drawn, the red line was crossed, and the response was not enforcement. It was redefinition. So the question is not whether Iran won or lost this particular conflict. The question is what every other actor in the world now believes about the next red line America draws, and whether that belief makes the world more stable or less. I will see you in the next one.